what are some of the qualities that you guys think a good doctor needs to have? We've all had experiences being with physicians. A good listener. This is a key component to medical school these days. They teach us communication skills. They've done like studies, and you walk into a room and it takes about 10 seconds before the doctors cut somebody off. We hate silence. Right? The doctor has to be a good listener. What other things?
Patient-centered.
Patient-centered. Love the buzzword. That buzzword is everywhere now. Being able to talk to somebody and not, treat them as something that you read in a book. It's something that you're addressing the concerns about the specific patient. I was in Chicago yesterday taking a standardized board exam, and we have to do these skills later on where we show that we're able to actually talk to a specific patient about their specific problems and to meet them at that level. What other things?
Empathetic.
Empathetic. I love these buzzwords. These are great. Empathy. So thinking about ways that you can go through services and different communication opportunities where you can demonstrate empathy for other people. When I was here as a student, I worked at the homeless shelter with one of the physicians, and I was able to interact with the patient over a long period of time. And that patient described to me this story about how he was the victim of a home invasion, shot, left for dead, shot 3 times. Ended up having to give up his job because he had developed severe neuropathy in his left arm, ended up having vaso-occlusive disease in his legs. And every day he told me that because he wasn't eligible for Medicaid, that for some reason in the loopholes, he had to decide whether or not he was going to own his house or pay for his medications for his pain. Trying to empathize with people. What other things?
Professionalism.
Professionalism. You apply for medical school, you're going into a profession where you have to work with other people, you have to collaborate with other people. You need to be able to communicate in a professional manner. Like, what else?
Creative problem solver.
Creative problem solving, critical thinking skills. This is something that when you enter medical school, no one's going to be able to expect you to know how to treat pneumonia. No one's going to be able to expect you how to treat a heart attack. What they do want to know is that you have the ability, the critical thinking skills, to take the information that they give you and then be able to assess based off of that.
Diligence and determination.
Yeah, diligence and determination. You go through 4 years of medical school, you go through 3+ years of residency, possibly a fellowship. You better be determined to go through this process. It's a long road. You get exhausted. You gotta have determination, you gotta have coping skills. What do you do when things get stressful? How do you deal with those issues? You have to know about them because at some point someone's gonna ask you, what's a stressful period in your life that you've had? How have you dealt with that? What's gonna happen to you when you're in medical school, you're a 3rd-year student, you have had 0 sleep, and you need to deal with that stress. What's your mechanism? What other things? Give me one more.
Discipline.
Discipline. Goes back to being determined. In order to finish medical school, you have to have the discipline to figure out what you need to do, when you need to do it, and how you're going to do it. And that just takes practice. I wasn't very good at that early on as a freshman and a sophomore here. But you learn pretty quickly when you're applying. So, you all named a bunch of different characteristics that you say makes a good doctor. And when you're in an interview and you're on your application, you get to list a bunch of experiences, a bunch of opportunities, and things that you're going to say, these are things that I've done, and these are going to help me become a better physician. These are how these experiences have helped me to grow. So something I did not do when I was a freshman and sophomore, despite the fact that I thought I wanted to go to medical school, was shadow a physician. Never went to a clinic. And then junior year, I was talking to some people, and they're like, yeah, I've been in this clinic, I've been in that clinic, I've been in the OR, I've been in the hospital volunteering, and I had nothing, zip. I had a very immature understanding of why I wanted to be a doctor. So what did I do? I went to clinic. And when you're in an interview, you need to be able to have some sort of clinic experience. What are the things that you can get out of a clinic experience? How many here have ever been in a clinic? A lot of you have experience in a clinic. What can you get out of it?
Good way to see why you would want to be a doctor, or even if you could.
Yeah. It's like saying that you love doing something without ever doing it. When you go there, you're able to actually see what people can do for other people. You watch the doctor and you see him communicate. You see her communicate with whatever patient they're interacting with. And you can finally start to see, maybe this is something that I want to do. Being able to talk to that one patient over a period of time, being able to talk to him about his problems, demonstrate empathy, that was a big driver for me finally deciding that I did want to pursue medicine. I mean, there's not very many opportunities in professions where you get to actually talk about these things with people in a very private manner, and you really get to their deep thoughts. That's a huge privilege. What are some other experiences that you guys can have that you're going to talk about on the interview trail that are going to show that you're going to be a good physician?
Maybe research.
Yeah, research. So, Dr. Willie mentioned I did immunology research. I think research is key. Research allows you to have the opportunity to figure out the ways people ask questions. Because you're going to be asking a lot of questions in medical school. You're going to be a lifelong learner. You're going to have to be able to identify research that's worth looking at and then following. The other buzzword in medical school right now is evidence-based medicine. The decisions that we make are based upon the research projects that people have done and have published on. I think research, whether or not you want to do basic science research, clinical science research, or like me, education-based research right now, it comes down to being able to identify and understand the different things that people do and how those processes come to fruition and how decisions are later made based upon that research. I think research is something that's is critical. How many here have had any experience in doing research? So you're going to have to talk about that in your application. You're going to have to talk about that in your interview trail. And people are going to ask you specifically, what did you do for this project? And for me, I had to talk to them about how I sat in a microscope for 8 hours a day, dissecting out salivary glands out of sandflies, which is pretty miserable. But, it's something that I was determined to finish the project, ended up completing it, and then ended up presenting it. And it shows an entire development and growth that I was able to talk about. I had this project in mind, I got help on that project, I worked it all the way through, and this is the end piece. What are some other experiences that are going to help you become a good doctor? One of the things for me, I thought was very key in terms of when I was applying is teaching others. When you're in medical school, you're learning to be an educator to patients. At some point as a resident, you might have to educate medical students. At some point as an attending, you're either going to have to educate your peers, your colleagues, nurses, medical students, residents. At that point, you're the expert and everyone's looking to you for education. And then you're also going to be learning along the way too. I taught as a TA here for 3 of the years. My sophomore year, my junior year, and my senior year. And for me, those opportunities to teach were a big indicator that I needed to self-reflect. Someone asks you a question, and you realize, you learn pretty quickly whether or not you know the answer to it. And when you're a TA and people are looking to you for advice, how do they prepare for something? What's the answer to this? Sometimes you have to go back to the books and reevaluate. People are going to ask you, what do you do when you don't know something? Are you somebody that makes up an answer, or are you able to identify sources that you can go to? If you have a question, you know how to get the answer. So teaching was another big thing for me. What's another big thing I'm sure you all do? Everyone here vomits this word. Service. Everyone loves service. It's great. Service is awesome. When you're in medical school and you're a doctor, your life is service to other people. You're going to be working with underserved people. You're going to be working with people that are coming to you at a very, potentially very stressful time in their lives. And you need to be there in the conversation with them. You need to learn how to take time out of your own schedule and just sit there and listen to somebody. Service is something that, if you're pursuing this profession, it is your life. You eat it and you breathe it. So, in terms of that, these are the things that you guys need to think about when you're identifying these qualities that are going to make you a good physician. What qualities have you demonstrated, whatever experiences that you have, whether or not it be clinic experience, research experience, teaching experience, service stuff, anything else. I promise you can make any experience that you have relevant to medical school and being a good doctor. You just got to know how to pick at that experience, self-reflect on it, and figure out what story you want to tell based on that. It's very easy. Somebody in an earlier session today asked me about being a trainer on the sports team. And he asked me how medical schools were going to look on that. And I told him, they're going to look on it great if you can describe it to them in a way that's relevant to you being a better doctor. You're going to be communicating with people. You're going to have to be assessing them on some injury and talking to them through that process. That's totally relevant to medical school and developing as a physician. So in terms of that, that's usually my spiel in terms of the critical objectives that I have. And at this point, you guys can feel free to ask questions too. I think the hardest question I was ever asked was whether or not I was a gunner. Now, the reason, it's a funny story why that came up, but if you don't know what the term of a gunner is, it's somebody that doesn't work well with other people. It's somebody that is out for themselves and is not interested in assisting other people. I looked at the guy straight in the eyes. I said, "Sir, I've been teaching for the past 3 years. I learn best by teaching other people. By definition, I can't be a gunner." That's probably the hardest question I got asked.
Did you say you're an M4?
I am an M4.
So you're you kind of decided the specialty you want?
Yeah, I just applied yesterday. So the seniors in the room that are going through this process right now, trust me, I feel your stress. Yeah, I'm applying for general surgery. I applied all across the country. I ended up applying to 40 different programs because that's what we're expected to do. Do not do that for medical school. I also applied for medical school. I applied to 21 programs. Also, do not do that. That was very expensive, and I ended up turning down a number of interviews because it ends up becoming too costly, and at some point, it's just not worth it. So when I was applying, I was told 14 to 15, okay? I'm going to defer that question to the health professions office because they're going to have a better idea in terms of what the current status is in terms of medical school applications. But things you want to think about when you're applying to medical school is where do you want to live in the country? If you have lived in Chicago your entire life and then you come to Notre Dame, you have been bred in the Midwest and you have lived in the Midwest, and you may never have left the Midwest. And if you have no interest in ever living in California, why would you apply there? If you do apply to California, people are going to ask you, what's going to bring you out here? You know, you've never left the Midwest. What's a good reason why I should give you an acceptance to this school, as opposed to somebody else who might actually come here? You're going to have to answer those questions. If you haven't done so yet, talk to the health professions office. I did not know about the health professions office until I was a senior. So it's something that, you know, you got to take advantage of those opportunities to talk to Father Foster and Dean Kohlberg. They know a lot of information on this stuff, and they deal with, you know, however many applicants from Notre Dame every year, and they go to these schools and they try to figure out what these schools want from applicants. So I plan on continuing education research. So education research is very different from basic science research. Okay, it's not something where I need to be in the lab for hours at a time. Most of my mentor right now at U of M, from my knowledge, so he runs a lab, but from my knowledge, he doesn't actually run the experiment. It's primarily working with other people and directing, you know, what are the specific questions we need to ask, what are the answers that we hope to get out of these questions, and how are we going to get there? So it's going back to like some of that research experience, that if you have the ability and the skills that you've demonstrated previously, that you can ask those questions, and you know how to answer those questions through whatever technique you choose, that can come in handy later. And some people do end up pursuing to do the heavy research in their career. Everyone's going to be a little bit different. When you become an attending, you'll pretty much have your choice of what you want to do. So your goal when you're applying should be to get that application in by like the last date, I would say, is late June. I applied June 26th. I remember that date. It's burned in my head because it was a terrifying date. And I took the MCAT about a month earlier than that so that I could have it by the time I was ready to apply. You send out primary applications to each school, and then those schools, if they want to give you a secondary application, will send you a secondary application after that. And those secondary application questions are typically more directed in terms of what their institution is looking for. Okay? And all of that costs a lot of money. So if you're like me and you're spending money on 21 primary applications and then you get, you know, 19 secondary applications, it's a lot of money. And I would recommend not doing that. I was doing research that summer. I mean, it's about what do you want to, I was still doing research that summer, I was still working that summer, where your priorities at, and my application was one of my big priorities. And I talked about that research that I was doing that summer in my application because I'd already started it, and I knew that I was going to finish it, and I was going to be able to talk about that in interviews. I wish I had taken a gap year. So that's just in terms of where I'm at now. I chose at the time not to take a gap year. Part of that is now I'm looking back and I realize that I'm about to start residency between 5 and 7 years, and then I'm going to do another 1 to 2 year fellowship after that. It's a long time. If you want to do something else, you know, prior to medical school, I would highly encourage that. Do something that you won't be able to do again, and you can even talk about in an interview. You take a gap year, people are going to ask you, what you do on your year off? Some people did research. Some people volunteered. What story do you want to tell? How are you going to use whatever experience? You can do anything. You can travel the world. I had a friend that ended up biking around the world. And it's still you can still use that experience to say how you're going to be a better doctor. You go to all these different cultures, you interact with a bunch of different people. At some point, you're going to come across a patient, and you're going to be able to fall back on those experiences and connect with them. Part of that at the time was because I had an idea that I wanted to go into surgery, and I knew it was a long process, and at the time my mentality was I wanted to get through it as quickly as possible. You got to realize that you're living life now, it doesn't start later. And I'm not that much older than all of you, despite the fact that I feel much older now that I don't know anybody here anymore. But that was my mentality at the time. I personally don't think that my decision to go to medical school at the time that I did was as mature as I wish that it had been. I wish I had had that extra gap year to take a step back and actually figure out how I was going to develop, what things I needed to be a better person and a better doctor later on. I did clinic for 6 months before I applied. In my mind, that wasn't a very good amount of time, and I think I should have had more. That being said, I ended up really liking what I'm doing right now, and I am where I'm at now. So I got lucky. So some schools will offer you the ability to defer. My roommate, my first year of med school, got an offer from Michigan because they accepted too many applicants and too many people wanted to go there. Was given a scholarship to defer a year. Some schools, I believe, will let you defer as long as you explain to them what's the reason for deferring. Once again, Dr. Dean Kohlberg and Fowler Foster can have a better answer in terms of if anything like that has changed. But as far as I'm aware, that was something that was available to me at the time. Why Michigan? So Michigan was a great school. It was probably the most fun I had on an interview day. You do a student interview. Do they still do a student interview or no, not anymore?
Yeah, they have 6 short, like nice one interviews and 2 normal, like regular. So they have 8 total.
Is one of them with a student?
No.
Ah. Okay. Well, they're changing it now. Michigan was a very friendly place to me on my interview day. I'm also from the state of Michigan, and we all know that public schools in-state, they treat their in-state people pretty nicely. And that has to factor into your decision making. It should. Medical school is not cheap. For in-state tuition at Michigan, it's $30,000 around there a year. For an out-of-state student, that's $50,000. I applied to University of Chicago and I got in there too. And I called the guy up there and I said, hey, I like your school as well. I'm an in-state student at Michigan. This is where their price tag is at. This is where your price tag is at. Help me out in some way. So Michigan for me was a little bit of, I liked the school, and then it also gave me the financial advantage. That doesn't mean that I wouldn't have had a good fit at a different school. But you got to figure out what schools you're going to have that best fit at. It's pretty easy on an interview day to figure out whether or not you're going to like a school. Very easy. At a school that I'm not going to name, I asked somebody, I said, what do you guys do for fun here? I thought it was a very appropriate question. And he said, you know what? You don't have time for fun. And I said, great, not coming here. Going on these interviews and talking to people, it's like you are getting as much information about them as they are getting about you. How many here have ever interacted with somebody in their life and in 5 minutes you're like, I hope I never see this person again? At first I thought I wasn't going to be able to tell which programs I was going to like right off the bat. Not true. Very much like going on a blind date for a little bit. Terrible experience. Terrible experience, and it doesn't get any better. I've taken 2 board exams since then. The MCAT has obviously changed. It has a couple different sections on it that were not available to me. The MCAT you have to prepare for. It comes without saying that your goal is to do as well as you can on the MCAT. Unfortunately, people do use it as a screening technique. when you have so many applicants, you have to have some way of figuring out, who fits where. Do I believe in the MCAT? No. I don't think getting a good score on the MCAT or getting a good score on these later board exams I had to take was a good demonstration of whether or not I was going to be a good physician or a bad physician. Okay? I'm saying that having done very well on these tests. I don't think they're good in terms of telling me and showing me that I'm going to be a good doctor. I think there's a lot of other things that we talked about go into being a good doctor, right? Service, being knowledgeable about research, being able to communicate, empathize with patients. To me, that means way more. And these schools are going to use those tests, but at the end of the day, when you're going on that interview, they want to know that they're talking to somebody that they can teach. That they can teach to be a good physician. That's mature enough to handle these relationships with patients over a long period of time. So a couple things that when you're applying to med schools, there is an option to apply for a scholarship where you get the application fee waived. When you're applying for medical school, you have to provide some sort of financial information, whether or not you're dependent or not on your parents. And I had to say that I was a dependent on my own parents, and so I was not eligible for scholarships from a lot of these places in terms of financial need. Some programs will also offer as an incentive to certain students to come to their school, and they'll offer a scholarship. I, once again, was not given any of those scholarships. But, if you want to go to a school, I think that, schools know it's expensive. Schools definitely know it's expensive. I'm taking out loans for my education. And you can have those conversations with their financial aid office. And you should have those conversations with their financial aid office. I believe most schools on the interview day have the opportunity for you to meet with those people to see what options they have available to students. And you can also, once again, I'm going to restate, go to Father Foster, go to Dean Kohlberg. These people are fantastic. Once again, I didn't use them enough early on, and I was a little bit late to the game. So, a little bit different. So I'm going to answer this question with a caveat. If I'm choosing between like a top 10 school and a not so top 10 school, at some point later on the reputation does matter to a certain extent. Okay? Coming from the University of Michigan, apparently, I'm not privy to this yet, but apparently our graduates are highly coveted on the interview trail. Once again, I haven't gone through this process yet, and I'm about to. That being said, you go to one school over the other, the heart is still the heart, the lungs are still the lungs, and they both exist in the same place. You're going to get the same education anywhere you go, and you can still excel at any med school. Okay, but I would say there is something to be said about going to one school over another versus reputation, but you also have to realize and weigh that against the fact that your education is going to be the same. It's going to be based upon you. I thought about MD PhD for a brief period of time. It's nice because a lot of programs will pay for your 8 years. It wasn't for me because I wanted to go into surgery. I didn't want to add an extra 4 years to my time. And you really got to love research. I had a friend at Michigan that was originally part of the MD PhD program and dropped out. And it's fine, you can do that, but sometimes there's a much smaller pool there, and people have fewer spots typically for those applicants. Think hard. If you want to do it, apply for it. But if you're going to apply MD PhD, you should also have some research to sort of back that up. That shows that this is the reason why I'm applying for MD PhD, and I have the background that says I should be one of these candidates. So I don't think you necessarily need to decide that right away. I think schools are changing at Michigan at least. They're trying to direct people earlier on, and they're changing the curriculum there. I think that I had an idea that I wanted to do surgery pretty early on. That being said, it's totally fine later on to change your mind. My roommate right now just decided like a month ago that he wanted to apply for internal medicine. So that's pretty late in the game. There are avenues at schools, I'm sure, where you can change your mind and you can find those experiences. If you decide that you want to do something else and you weren't one of these applicants that want to go into orthopedic surgery and you haven't done, you've been doing orthopedic surgery your whole life and then you switch and you do something else, a lot of people will take that into account and say, you've still done research, you still have shown that you can ask questions and answer questions. All about what story you all want to tell. Don't tell anyone this, but my first year of medical school was easier than my last year of college. And I partied a lot more. Medical school is a fun time. The first year it's a different type of information, but Notre Dame prepares you guys pretty well. You're all a smart bunch. You all did fantastic on the ACT and the SAT, and you're all at a great university. People will also know that on the interview trail. You have Notre Dame clubs all throughout the nation. The transition, figure out what school you're going to be a good fit at. Talk to the students. Makes it a lot easier transition when you get along with the students that are already there. I did not think I would transition very well at the one school that said they weren't going to have fun in it ever. That's just not my personality. I mean, I think it all, like, in terms of applying for the PhD part, I mean, you got to show some interest in research. And then any experience that you can't describe is a meaningless experience. You might have helped children in Africa, and if I can describe that experience better in terms of its meaning than you can describe to me, that experience is not a good experience. So any experience that you can talk about and you want to say that this is why you're going to be a better MD, PhD candidate, whether or not it's service, whether or not it's research, education, or some sort of clinic opportunity, at that point, it's up to you. But you got to realize that you can change literally any experience to make it something that's relevant. I'm a photographer. In my current application right now, I'm talking about how I'm working on a project looking at patients' fears and how you can describe that through photographic narratives. Took something that I wanted, not typically relevant to medicine, and I'm trying to make it relevant. You can make anything you want into a relevant experience. I mean, the best professors for me are going to be the people I asked for letters of recommendation. Dr. Whaley, Dr. Mark Olson. My favorite class here was a poetry class. Indo-European epic poetry. If you guys have not read Dante's Divine Comedy, I highly recommend it. These are, I mean, I asked all these people for letters of recommendation. The best, you want to develop relationships early on with people. Okay. And you want to be able to develop them in such a way that you can interact with them on multiple occasions, and then you can have conversations with them, and they can actually get to know you as a person. Because they're going to ask these people for letters of recommendation later, and they know it's coming. If you're struggling in a class, that's a great opportunity to go talk to somebody and possibly get a letter of recommendation out later. You're struggling in class, you go and you work with that teacher over a long period of time, and you show some sort of success after that, and you talk about that in your interview. People always mention about how they're more likely to take that candidate that struggled and overcame that struggle. more so than the person that just coasted by. Because they want to know that when stuff, when stuff gets tough, you're able to overcome that stressful period. You're able to cope with that. And you know how to ask for help. Medicine's a team business. Fortunately, Notre Dame teaches you guys to all do, team-based stuff, to be, beyond yourselves, and to work well with others. You will appreciate Notre Dame a lot more once you leave. I promise you that.
First question I asked, right, was what are the characteristics that make a good doctor? Find experiences that are going to help you be able to identify those qualities yourself. Being in a clinic, communicating, demonstrating empathy. You got to have those experiences to show that you can do that stuff and that you're mature enough to do that stuff later on. International colleagues. Off the top of my head, I'm sure that I do. They're not coming to mind right now, but I mean, like, why do you ask that question?
Because I'm an international.
Yeah, I mean, there are international people that apply to medical school every year. Unfortunately, I'm blanking on the people specifically in my class, but those people do apply, and it's completely appropriate. You're going to bring something to the table. You can talk about that you're from a different, if you're an international student, you're from a different culture. You're going to be able to have different experiences that would benefit your classmates. You're going to be from a different part of the country with different cultural values. And that's valuable. I am a student who grew up essentially around this area, never left the Midwest, had very few experiences. My perception of the world is this. When you go to an interview and you go to a school, you make it this. You bring those opportunities. You should talk about that. Self-reflection. Seriously, I mean, it sounds somewhat silly when you first hear it, but it's critical. You're going to have a bunch of experiences. You're going to have some failures. Focus on those failures. Figure out what it was that you struggled with, and then overcome that, and be able to demonstrate that you can identify where your weak spots are, and then you can address those weak spots. For me, I didn't have it. I had zero clinic experience my junior year. I was applying to medical school apparently. So what did I do? I got some clinic experience. It's silly, right? It sounds silly, but I mean, for me, that was probably my weakest spot in my application. I talk about, if you have a class that doesn't look very good in your application, you ended up, getting a C or something or whatever it is, in whatever subject, but then you go back and, you interact with those people, you take the next upper level class, and you excel in that class, people will notice that. And you can talk about that as a key point. People are going to ask you, what's something you struggled with in life? I worked in that little museum across the hall. Every summer. And then I also did, the one summer I did not do that was when I was doing research. So I talked about that opportunity in my application, but it was a pretty small part of my application. You want to use those summers valuably. You use those summers well. They're valuable. They're opportunities for you to get different experiences. You also should have fun during them too. So, don't. Once again, life starts now. Does not start later. You're only going to have a finite number of summers. Use them well, but also use them just be a person. I spent a summer in Spain for 6 weeks when they won the World Cup. It was probably the best experience of my life as people were jumping off the bridges. It was fantastic, and it was something I talked about in my interview because there's that position that
some point went over to Spain, and I talked to him about how, oh yeah, I was in Granada during this period. You know, you connect with that person on that level. It's also happened that, you know, I interact with some patients that also had similar experiences, or they're from Spain, and say, oh, which part are you from? You're going to see people from all across the world. Everything will come into play. You got to figure out what you want to come into play. That decision's up to you. My advice to you is to work in it enough for you to be able to talk about it. Somebody in the earlier session asked me, what is the number of volunteer experiences I should have? And I said, if you have 10 experiences and you can't talk about any one of them in depth, once again, they all don't mean anything. But if you have 2 experiences, 1 experience, 3 experiences, and you can go into every single one of those in depth, in detail, with a point where somebody is enjoying that experience while you were talking with them, those are the ones that are really going to have the impact during the interview. Those are the ones that are going to draw your personality out and show that you actually have something worth bringing to the table. I did not. I considered getting a minor in medieval studies for fun. Ended up not doing it because senior year came around. But I think it's great. One of the things that, I talk about photography on the stuff, and it's something that shows that you're a human being. If you got some other interest that you want to pursue that's beyond medicine, more power to you. People are going to respect you for that. If you want to get some English major or English minor, it seems like it's not relevant to Michigan or to medical school. I've got a classmate that her major was in English. Totally appropriate. I mean, it just depends on how you play it. Interacting with people. I was not a huge fan of the classroom. Being able to actually talk to people, interact with them, hear their stories. I mean, that's why you go to med school, right? I suppose unless you become a radiologist. But I mean, you want to be taking care of people. At the end of the day, that's the goal. Anything else? Anything that you guys have in terms of advice for me, please email Dr. Whaley. Let her know what things worked well, what things did not work well. Once again, I've been giving this talk for, this is now my 4th time, and I hope to do it more. But